Okay, so today is Monday, March 13th. Getting started with Aesop's Fables, and there are not going to be many students around this week because a bunch of families are getting started on spring break, Easter break. But even if there's just one or two students, I mean, there's obviously more than that, but even if there's just a couple students, I'm always going to have these weekly meetings because one of the benefits for me is I get videos from these meetings that I can then put on the lessons. So I'm not here just to work with students. I'm also here just to make these videos. So if our group gets small, you don't have to worry that we're not going to have class. I'm always going to have class, even if I was by myself. So you can count on these scheduled classes. And if there's ever going to be a class canceled, if you just go to that live class page, I'll put an announcement on that page that there will be no classes today. Okay, so we'll try to find a way to communicate well in the future. This week, we have just our normal week of classes. Next week, I'm going to start offering more classes. So if you haven't seen that schedule of classes, check it out on the live class page and talk to your parents about which classes you'd like to participate in. They'll all be available in recorded videos. So if you can't make a class, it's okay. You can still watch the videos. All right, this week for Aesop's Fables, this week we're going on to The Old Woman and Her Maids. So let's take a look at this together. The Old Woman and Her Maids. The Old Woman and Her Maids. Let me close this out. All right, The Old Woman and Her Maids. Anyone interested in reading? Lorraine Scott, Damien Ozevec. Let's see, Damien was first. We'll give Damien the shot here. Where is he at? Where's Damien at? Damien. All right, Damien, you've got the microphone. If you'd like to read for us, read The Old Woman and Her Maids. Just read nice and slow and clear, okay? Get your microphone unmuted. Your microphone's not working. I'll give you 3 seconds to get that figured out. All right. Damien's microphone's not working, so we'll go to Lorraine. Rainey, you want to take a shot at this? Let me find you here in our list of students. Figure out where you're at. Lorraine Scott. There you are. I just asked you to unmute, whether it's Huck or Lorraine, whoever wants to read.
Sorry,
there you go.
my mom didn't want me to do this. I volunteered, but then my mom said not to. Sorry.
Okay. All right. Who wants to read? Let's go. Somebody else. Don't volunteer to read if you're in the middle of morning traffic in the house. Who else? Daniel Crisanto. We'll give you a shot to read here. Let's find Daniel Crisanto. There he is. Go ahead, unmute yourself.
Okay, thank you.
There you go. Go ahead. The Old Woman and Her Maids. Take your time, nice and clear, okay?
A certain old woman had several maids, whom she used to call their work every morning at the crowing of the cock.
Crowing of the cock.
Sorry,
yep.
crowing
Okay.
of the cock. The maids, finding it grievous to have their sweet sleep disturbed so early, killed the cock, thinking when she was quiet they could enjoy their warm beds a little longer. The old woman, vexed at the loss of the cock, and suspecting them to be concerned in it, from that time made them rise soon after midnight.
Okay, thank you very much. So we have the fable of The Old Woman and Her Maids. And remember to pay attention so that you can get this fable finished. As soon as we're done with this class, you can have it all in your mind, know exactly how to answer the questions and get these assignments done. So the fable of The Old Woman and Her Maids. Okay, so the first challenge we have with our assignment is to paraphrase. And so we want to give a paraphrase or a summary of the fable. So we've got an old woman And maids are like servants. They're her servants, and there's lots of different situations that could exist. You know, this could be an old woman who's got some servants who work for her house, and they're young. That's why they're called maids. That means unmarried women. So younger unmarried women would be called maids or maidens. They could be servants in the house. They could be her own daughters. We could allow them to be daughters in the story if we wanted to. Or we could think of them as just like employees, people who work for a boss. This woman could be like the boss, and she's got some young ladies who work for her. So these young ladies would go to sleep, and the old woman would call them to get their work started when the cock crowed. And you probably don't know what it means for the cock to grow. I mean, you probably know what it means that the cock, remember, it's a male chicken, right? It's the male chicken, and or a rooster. And these roosters, they're very brave, and they're very loud. And we talked about the cock and the pearl. We talked about what a rooster is like, that they're arrogant, and they're very tough. They think they're the boss, and they fight a lot. And normally the rooster crows around 3 o'clock in the morning. So the rooster doesn't crow at sunrise like many people think. The rooster crows actually before sunrise. And in the ancient world, when people were much more farm focused than we are in our society, the time when the rooster crowed was actually considered a time of the day. So they would refer to it as the cock crow. The cock crow was a time of the day when the roosters started crowing in the morning, and it was before sunrise, usually closer to like 3 o'clock in the morning. And the way that the day was scheduled in the ancient world, they didn't have any electricity. And you've always got to remember that. That's why chronology is so important. Whenever we study a story of the ancient world, really of any society before the 1900s, we have to remind ourselves that they have no electricity. And so the only source of light that exists, and think about, we're talking about like outside work or kitchen work. Like think about washing the dishes, think about sewing or doing laundry or anything like that, cleaning. Think about the work that women would be doing. There's no way that work could be done unless there was light. So normally the cock crow was a time before sunrise to wake up and get ready for work. You could do some work by candlelight or something like that, but really it was a time to get ready for the day, because once the sun came up, once the sun rose and there was sunlight, you could only work until the sun went down. And when the sun went down, all work had to stop because there was simply no light. So working during the daylight hours was much more important back then than it is for us. If you live on a farm, you might understand how important daylight is. And you think about daylight much more than people do who live in the city. For example, with my work, I actually sleep later into the morning because I work overnight. So I do most of my work at 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock in the morning, because my family goes to bed and I've got some quiet time. And most of my videos and most of my teaching work that I do overnight when my family is sleeping. And then I actually go to bed around the time when the sun rises. And I sleep until 11 o'clock or so, and then I get up and start my day. So my day is on a different schedule than a farmer's day would be. And the only reason why I can do that is because of electricity. If we didn't have electricity, I wouldn't be able to do that. So in these older stories, we have to remember that the fact that they don't have any electricity helps us to understand the point of the story. So when the cock crows, it's sort of a warning that it's almost sunrise. And so the cock crow was seen as a time to get started, to wake up and get ready for the day. There was some work you could do, in your house, like let's say you had some desk work to do, some paperwork to do, things like that, you could light a candle and get started with that. If you said morning prayers, you could light candles and you could get started and say your morning prayers. You can get yourself dressed. You can get your sleeping area cleaned up and things like that. Because once the sun rose, you had to be working because the sunlight was all the time that you had. And remember too, in the winter months, there was hardly any sunlight. You had from, let's say, 7 o'clock until like 5 o'clock p.m. So you really had to get up and get your work done because the sunlight was the only light you had to work. So these maids, they used to be woken up at the crowing of the cock, which was that time of the day, a couple hours before sunrise. They would get woken up and they'd have to start their work, and they complained about it because they love their quote unquote sweet sleep. They love their sleep, and they would be disturbed so early in the morning by this crowing of the cock, which was their alarm clock. So these maids decided that to solve their problem and allow themselves to sleep longer, they would kill that rooster so it didn't wake them up anymore. Okay, so one day the rooster crows, they're tired of waking up early, so they think, well, you know what? Let's just kill this rooster and then we'll be able to sleep longer. So they kill the rooster. Well, the old woman, and it was the old woman's rooster, so now she's even more annoyed. It says vexed at the loss of the cock. So now she's angry that they went and did this foolish thing and killed the rooster, and she suspects that they did it. From that time, made them rise soon after midnight. And that's the end of our fable. Now, I just want to say a little bit more about time, because in the past, and again, we're crazy. Our modern society is crazy with this stuff because we have electricity. I don't know what, write in the chat, what time do you normally get to bed? What time do you normally get to bed? Because you'll see that we usually get to bed pretty late. I know my kids are up 10, 11 o'clock at night. They're usually up pretty late. Maybe some of you get to bed at a decent hour. That's good if you do. If you work by sunlight, you've got to get to bed early because you've got to get up early. That's actually pretty good. You guys are pretty early to bed. That's good. But the fact that we have electricity, we can leave lights on and we can work up till midnight. We can work overnight. Like I said, like I do, I work overnight because of electric lighting. Okay. But in the ancient world, they couldn't do that. And the day, because it was based on the sun, they had a weird way of telling time. Remember, they didn't have watches. They didn't have clocks. They didn't have computers. They didn't have anything electrical. They didn't have any battery powered clocks. So in order to tell the time, they had to go by the sunlight. The sunlight determined the time of the day. And I mean, think about it. When you go outside in the morning, just think with me here. Wave your hands if you can hear me. Some say they can't hear me. Yeah, my sound is okay. So it's on your side. What you've got to think about is the day really started with the sunrise. So you can imagine walking outside your house and you can imagine where the sun rises, and you can say, if the sun is over there, if the sun is over on the side in the east, it's early in the morning. If the sun is straight over the top of your house, it's midday, it's noon. And then if the sun is setting on the western side of your house, you can tell it's almost evening. So you can tell the time of the day by where the sun is in the sky. It's either morning at sunrise, midday, or evening when the sun is setting. And then it would be dark from sunset until the next sunrise. Well, in the ancient world, what they did was they divided the daytime hours into, let's say 12 hours. They divided it into 12 hours. And so when the sun would rise, that would be the first hour. And then they'd have 2 or 3 or 4 hours. And then midday would be the 6th hour. and then there would be a few more hours, and then sunset would be the 12th hour. But you can imagine that there's a problem with that. And the problem with that is that during the year, the sun is up for a different amount of time. So in the summertime, the sun is up for a long time, and they would divide the daytime hours by 12. So the hours of the day would be longer. And then in the wintertime, the sun would be up for a shorter period of time, but they would still divide the day by 12 hours, and each of the hours would be shorter. So the actual times of the day were different during the year, whereas we just look at a watch and we say, oh, it's 9 o'clock a.m., it's 12 o'clock p.m., it's 3 o'clock p.m., and our hours, because of our watches and clocks, are always the same. Before electricity, the times of the day would always be different. Some hours would be long, some hours would be short, depending on what time of the year it was. And the Catholic life was organized around these hours of the day. So if you know what the Liturgy of the Hours is, the prayers of the church, the prayers that priests and monks and nuns pray, their prayers are even named after the hours of the day. So the first prayer of the day is called prime, and then they've got another prayer that's called terce, and they've got another prayer that's called sext, which means the 6th hour of the day. Then there's none, which is the 9th hour of the day, and then vespers is evening prayer. So at these different times of the day, Catholics would pray, but the schedule always changed because the sun was up for longer or shorter periods of the day. But the cock crow was the time of the day before the sunrise, usually when people would get up to get work started early in the morning. Remember, Jesus says to Peter, by the time the cock crows, you will deny me 3 times. So Jesus tells St. Peter that he's going to deny him 3 times before the cock crows. That means 3 times he's going to deny him overnight. So he's going to deny him in the middle of the night. And by the time the cock crows, by that time in the morning, he will already have denied Christ. So when Jesus said that to Peter, you will deny me 3 times before the cock crows, he was talking about a specific time of the day. He wasn't just talking about a rooster. He was talking about a specific time of the day and a way that people before modern electricity used to tell the time. They used to refer to this time of the day as the cock crow. That was usually like 3 o'clock in the morning or so, a couple hours before sunrise. Also throughout church history, people used to wake up at midnight. People used to go to bed when the sun went down at night. Like some of you say, you get to bed early. The sun would go down and people would be tired from their day's work. So they would often go to bed when the sun went down. And so they'd go to bed when the sun went down, sleep for a couple hours, and then they would wake up in the middle of the night. They would wake up at midnight. And again, for religious people, midnight used to be a time for prayer. And so there was a time of prayer called matins, M-A-T-I-N-S, matins, that would be said at midnight in the middle of the night. So they would wake up, they would get out of bed, they might get a snack, they might, sit in the kitchen and get some work done in the kitchen, maybe do some reading or some paperwork and things like that, any kind of desk type work that they had. They could light some candles and get some stuff done in the middle of the night. It's different from us because usually we go to bed later and we just sleep through the whole night and we wake up in the morning. Well, people didn't do that throughout history. They would go to bed much earlier when the sun went down, and then they would sleep until midnight, wake up at midnight, spend some time awake, and then go back to bed for a second sleep. And that would be the sleep that goes on until they get up in the morning. So we have to learn that the schedule of the day was a little different or very different in the past because they lived by sunlight, and it made them live differently than we live because we just turn lights on and can do things in the house. Okay, so when it says that she got them up at midnight, that wasn't a crazy thing because people used to get up at midnight and spend some time working. But what they did, the point of this story is that these maidens, they had work to do, and their mistress or master, this old woman, she used to wake them up at a certain time of the day, and they didn't like that. So they decided to kill the cock and think that maybe if they stopped his crowing, they wouldn't have to wake up in the morning. And what happens is the old woman, who is actually the real cause of their getting up in the morning, she was angry that they killed the cock, and so she decides to make them get up even earlier. She makes them get up at midnight. So the moral of the fable is pretty simple, right? It says that when there's a problem, you should make sure that if you're going to try to get rid of a problem, you should make sure you take away the cause, because if you don't take away the cause, you could make your situation even worse. These people killed the cock when it was really the old woman that made them get up, and it was necessary for them to get up. So they thought that by getting rid of the rooster, they would fix their problem, but the rooster wasn't the problem. It would be like destroying your alarm clock. It's like if your parents put an alarm clock in your room, and when you went to bed at night, your mother set the alarm clock to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning. And the alarm clock would go off, and you'd get annoyed at the alarm clock. And so what you thought to do was break the alarm clock. And so you chose to break the alarm clock, or you threw the alarm clock out the window, thinking that if the alarm clock wasn't there, you would be able to sleep. But as soon as your mother finds out that the alarm clock's not around, she's just going to wake you up anyway. So your problem's not solved at all. And worse than that, she might get angry that you broke the alarm clock and make you get up even earlier, or make you do even more chores than you would have had to do before. So you may make your situation worse by trying to fix it in a foolish way. Now, when we think about these maidens, normally when we have a hard time getting up in the morning, there's a couple of causes for that, a couple of reasons why we don't like to get up. One reason is because we go to bed late. So one reason why people complain about getting up is not because it's hard to get up in the morning, but it's because they stay up late at night. And what kind of stuff do you think people do late at night? Give me some ideas. What are some things that people stay up late at night to do? Read books. What else? Play games, watch TV. So usually when people stay up late at night, they're just wasting time, right? They're watching movies, they're playing games, reading some books, maybe, drawing, okay? So normally when people stay up late at night, they're just goofing around, wasting time. Bedtime comes, let's say bedtime is nice and early, like 9 o'clock. If you get to bed at 9 o'clock and you have to get up at 5 o'clock, you've got a full 8 hours to sleep. You're going to have no problem getting up in the morning if you get to bed at 9 o'clock. But what happens is you end up fooling around in your room, and you stay up until 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock in the morning. And then you end up going to bed at 1 o'clock in the morning. You finally fall asleep, and you've got only 5 hours to sleep. And then the alarm clock goes off, and you complain that you're so tired, and you don't like getting up early, and all of this complaining and stuff like that. And the truth is, getting up early has nothing to do with your problem. Staying up late is your actual problem, but you're blaming it on getting up early. So usually people who complain about getting up early are people who stay up late and waste time. So the real problem that they have is that time that they waste at night when they stay up late, but they complain about getting up early, which really isn't a problem at all. They simply don't go to bed on time. So that's the first cause why people complain about getting up early, is because they stay up late, and it's their own fault. But secondly, there's another possible problem, and it's that you're just lazy, right? Sloth and laziness. You just don't want to get to work. The alarm clock goes off in the morning, it's time to get up, and you don't want to go to work. You want to just keep playing like you were playing at night before you went to bed. You don't like the idea of going to work. The alarm clock goes off, or the rooster crows, and you just don't want to get up because you're slothful and lazy. And Proverbs warns us about slothfulness, about laziness. people who don't like to work, they live with the risk of becoming poor people. And we don't mean poor people in a good way. We mean poor people in a sinful way, where they're poor because they don't work. And they complain about getting up in the morning because they would, not because they're too tired to get up, but because they don't want to get to work. That's a different kind of problem. So we've got two possible problems here. One is you go to bed too late and you don't get enough sleep, and then you blame the morning for your lack of sleep. The other problem is you're lazy and you don't want to get to work, and you don't want to get out of bed because you hate the idea of getting to work. So two different possible problems. These maids, they probably had the second problem. They probably didn't want to get to work. They were probably motivated to complain by laziness, not wanting to get started with the day's work. So they thought that the cock was the source of the problem in their life. So they decided to kill this cock. And when they did that, it made their master, this old woman, made her even more angry with them. And so she made them get up even earlier. So their problem got worse. Their problem got worse. And this is often the what happens to lazy people. So let's focus on laziness here. Okay. Yeah, very good. The Bible talks a lot about laziness, and sloth, S-L-O-T-H, sloth is one of the chief sources of sin. Sloth is one of the chief sources of sin. Now, what's bad about sloth is that you take somebody who doesn't want to work, and so they start making decisions, bad decisions in their lives, and they don't work. And what happens in their life, and this is what's kind of funny about slothful people, especially slothful kids like you guys. You're growing up and you make decisions in your life about what you want to do and what you don't want to do. And what's strange is that usually people who are slothful, in the end, they have to work even more than the people who work hard. Slothful people have to work harder in the end. They have to work even more than people who do work. And so what's one of the most foolish things about slothfulness and laziness is, if you're a person who doesn't like to work, you're going to have to work even harder in the future. So it's an irrational behavior, because let's think about it. Let's imagine you're 8 years old. So just think through this with me. Imagine that you're 8 years old and your parents give you the opportunity to study, and they say, all we really want you to do is study. We want you to focus on your studies. We want you to get all of your schoolwork done. Maybe they want you to go to college and go and get a professional degree or prepare for a professional career of some kind. They want you to work every day. You probably get yelled at because you play all the time, or you don't get your schoolwork done, or you don't get your other work done. And so there's two kinds of children. There's one child who listens to his parents and works hard and does what he's told to do while he's young. And there's another child who just goofs around all the time, is always trying to get out of work. Every time his parents turn around, he starts goofing around, and he just wastes all this time because he doesn't like to work. Well, that can go on. That can go on until you're 18 years old or so, but then all of a sudden it's time to start to work and become independent. It's time to become independent. And now those two kids have very different situations. The kid who did all his schoolwork, he's got all kinds of opportunities open to him. He can go to college. He can join the military. He can enter into religious life. He can go to seminary and become a priest. The kid who did all of his studies while he was growing up has lots and lots of doors open to him to choose from when he becomes an adult. And what's funny is, because he worked so hard when he was younger, when he's older, some of the options that he has to choose from actually are pleasant and don't require a lot of work. Like going to college. Going to college it's work to study, but the life of a college student really isn't very difficult. It's actually a nice time of life. The same thing would be true with religious life. Entering into religious life, a boy or a girl never has to worry about making money. They can just devote their whole life to religion and study. It's a relatively easy life compared to the life of a person who has not studied and who has not worked. And now, in order for them to make money, for example, they've got to go, quote unquote, look for a job. And so they go into the world to look for a job. They don't have a good education. They don't have many good skills. And so it's hard for them to actually make any money. It's hard for them to make any money because they don't have any knowledge or skills. And so what happens is they have to take the worst jobs. They have to take the jobs that nobody else wants. They usually have to take the dirtiest, most difficult jobs, or they have to work at the worst times. They don't get to pick the hours they work. They have to work whenever the boss tells them to work. So what often happens is the lazy people end up with the worst jobs. And so the people who don't like to get up and get to work, they end up having to do jobs that no one wants to get up and do, and their problems just get worse over time. So this is one of the problems, or this is the most important problem with laziness and sloth, is that people who don't like to work, their situation just gets worse, and their work gets harder and harder and harder as they go on. Whereas people who do their work when they're young, they have opportunities to choose to do things they really like. They have more knowledge than other people. They have better qualifications than other people. They have more opportunities than other people, and they get to choose to do what they like, and they actually enjoy a happier, more pleasant life because they did their work when they were younger. So the people who do their work when they're young, who do their work like these maidens, the people who do their work often get better situations in the future where there's more pleasant work to do than people who don't do their work, who go from bad to worse because their jobs just get worse. They have no skills. They have no recommendations. There's no people who will say, oh yeah, Tommy, he's a really good worker. They don't have any recommendations or references to try to get a better job. And so they're stuck with the worst jobs. I'll use myself as an example here. When I was a college student, I went to college and I devoted myself to my studies. I didn't hang out with any friends. I already I already knew I was going to get married because I met my wife when we were only 17 years old. So I knew I was going to get married. And when I went to college, I wasn't interested in hanging out with anybody or goofing around. I just wanted to study and get my studies done. So I focused on my studies when I was in college. And I studied really hard, and I studied all day, every day. And I won awards in college, and I ended up graduating with honors from college. And then when I was finished with college, because I had worked hard during college, I had lots of opportunities for things that I could do. And I was able to choose to do exactly what I wanted to do. I wanted to teach the classics in private schools, and I was able to do that. In fact, I was able to get a teaching job before I even finished my college studies because I had references from my college professors that helped me to get a job before I was even qualified to get a job. So I knew exactly what I wanted to do. And because I worked hard when I was in college, I was able to go on from college and do exactly what I wanted to do because I had the qualifications to do it. Other kids go to college and they choose to use that time to try to make friends and fool around and have fun. And then when they finally do finish, their studies are not very impressive. They don't earn any awards or honors or anything like that. They don't have any references. Their professors don't even know who they are. And they have to try to find a job in the world, and they often struggle to do so because if you don't study and if you don't work hard to get important skills, you don't have anything, you don't give anyone any reason to give you a job. And so you have to compete with all the other people who also don't have any knowledge or skills. You've got to compete with them for the worst jobs, because those will be your only option. So one moral of this fable that I'd like you to focus on is that people who don't like to work end up working even more. People who don't like to work end up working even more. People who don't like the work that they're supposed to do end up doing work that's even worse, that they like even less. And so the life of a lazy person goes from bad to worse. I think that's the real moral of this fable. I'll repeat that. The life of a lazy person goes from bad to worse. All right. And you've got to be careful, because when you're a kid, and I know that all of you struggle with this, and all of you understand this, it's very difficult to do the things you're supposed to do, because as a kid, you think about so many things you could do for fun or for play, and you don't take seriously thoughts about your adult life. And your parents are always trying to make you do things that will help you when you become an adult, because they're adults and they know how hard it is to make a good, honest living as an adult. They're trying to put you in a position where you can live a happy adult life and do what you would like to do. They're trying to tell you what you should do when you're a kid. They're telling you should study and you should work and you should take care of yourself and you should eat healthy and you should pray and all of these good things. You should develop virtues. You should seek wisdom. You should learn skills, all these different things they tell you. And as a kid, you're like, nah, I don't want to do those things. I just want to play. I want to play these games on my computer. I want to read these goofy books. I want to play with my toys. I want to run around in the streets with my friends. Those are the kind of things that kids do. And those things are actually foolish. And it's hard for kids to not choose foolish things. And then all of a sudden, they become adults when they're 18, 19 years old, and they're totally unprepared for adult life. And they have a very hard time getting started as adults. So your parents are trying to save you from those things. And no, it's not saying you can't do those things, but if those things get in the way of what you're supposed to be doing, then they're actually sinful. If you can't study, and especially if you disobey your parents, that's one of the commandments. One of the 10 commandments is that you're supposed to honor your father and your mother. You're supposed to obey your parents. So if they're telling you that you should study, and they're telling you that you should do your work, and they're telling you should learn these skills, and you disobey them, you're breaking the 10 commandments, the most important rules of life. And the reason why God tells you to obey your parents is because God wants you to listen to adults when you're a kid and do things that adults tell you you should do, because they're adults. They're thinking about your life as an adult. Think about your childhood. When you're 18 years old, you're legally an adult. You have the right to move out of your house, start your own family, start your own business, go to college, join the military, go into religious community. You've got all these options when you're 18 years old. So your childhood only lasts until you're 18, and then you're an adult. And the normal length of life is, let's say, till 70 years old. So you would have 52 years of adult life, 52 years of adult life, and only 18 years of childhood. 18 years of childhood and 52 years of adult life. And if you were smart, you would use the years of your childhood to prepare for your adulthood. You wouldn't try to have a childhood that lasts forever. You would realize that my childhood is only going to last until I'm 18, and then I've got to go find work to do for my life. I've got to go choose a vocation and get started with my adult life, and I'm going to be an adult for 52 years possibly. And so you think about how long your adult life is and how short your childhood is, and it's really dumb to focus on being a kid and trying to be a professional child when you're 15 years old, instead of using your childhood to get ready for adulthood. That's what your parents are trying to tell you. They're trying to tell you, please use your childhood years to study and learn skills and get ready for adulthood, because then you can have a happy adult life. And if you waste your childhood, you're going to have to do these things anyway when you're an adult, and it's much more difficult to do these things when you're an adult than when you're a kid. Like right now in your life, you don't have anything else to do except study, especially those of you who are homeschooled. You really don't have anything good to do other than study. Maybe you have some household chores to help with and things like that, and that's fine. But you're free to study. And when you're an adult, when you're 20, 25 years old, you're not going to have as much time to study. So usually the studies that you get done during your childhood are going to be the bulk and the most important studies of your life, because it's much more difficult to study when you're an adult. Because when you're 25 years old, if you decide you want to study when you're 25 years old, your parents aren't going to want to pay the bills of a 25-year-old person to study. No one wants to support a 25-year-old or a 20-year-old who's studying, because you're old enough and big enough to support yourself. But your parents will provide for everything you need for you to study when you're a kid. And that's why your childhood is the best time for you to get your studies done and learn these skills to get ready for adult life. So these foolish maids in this fable, they decide that they don't want to get up and get to work. They don't like to work. They're slothful. So they kill the rooster. And what happens in the end? They have to get up even earlier and work even harder, because now they don't even have a rooster to crow to wake them up later. So the old woman makes them wake up even earlier. So their situation goes from bad to worse. And that's what happens to slothful people. That's what happens to lazy people. So the moral of this fable that I'm recommending to you, the moral of the fable is, life goes from bad to worse for lazy people. Life goes from bad to worse for lazy people. Okay? So that's the moral. And again, when we look at the characters, We have an old woman, okay? And what do I always tell you is important in Aesop's fables about someone being old? What's important about being old in Aesop's fables? Who can tell me that? We're told this is an old woman. Very good, Fenetzes. They're experienced and wiser. They have prudence. They have experience in life. So usually if an old person is yelling at you to do something, if an old person is yelling at you or telling you to do something, they're telling you that because they're experienced and they know what's ahead of you. And you, as a young person, you don't know what's ahead of you. The old person is telling you what you should do based on what's coming in your life. And so anytime we see old people in Aesop's fables, we're to understand that usually they're experienced people who know what life is like. When we read about young people like these maids, they're the opposite. Young people don't have experience. Young people don't know how adult life works. They don't know what it's like to have a job. They don't know what it's like to pay bills. They don't know what it's like to have to compete against other people to make a living. They don't understand how hard it is. And they don't understand how long they're going to have to work. For 30, 40, 50 years, they're going to have to work. And so they make bad decisions because they don't have experience and they don't think about the things they should be thinking about. And so they do all kinds of foolish things. The Proverbs say, foolishness is bound up in the heart of a child. Foolishness is bound up in the heart of a child. And so children are symbols of foolishness. And to become a wise child is a child who listens to the advice of adults, of elders. Most of all, a child who obeys and listens to his or her parents. That's wisdom for a child, is just to listen and obey to your authorities. So the old woman, she runs the household. She knows what needs to get done. She knows what time you need to get up. She knows you need to get to work. She's an old, experienced woman. The maids are young and foolish. They're lazy. They don't like their work. They would like to just sleep all day. They decide to do something foolish because they're foolish young people. They do something foolish. They kill the cock, thinking that if he was quiet, they should be able to sleep longer. Notice it says they should enjoy their warm beds. So they don't like getting up in the morning when it's cold before the sun rises to get their work started. They'd like to stay in bed. And in the end, their situation is even worse. They have to get up even earlier. They get even less sleep. And this is what happens to lazy people. That's why laziness is so foolish. What lazy people want, they actually don't get. They get even worse situations. Okay, so the old woman and her maids, the moral of the story is the life of lazy people goes from bad to worse. The characters, we have an old, experienced woman who knows how you should live, probably because she's done foolish things herself and she had to pay for them the hard way. We've got the young maids who, being young, don't know how to make good decisions and make foolish decisions. And they end up making their life even worse than if they would have just been obedient and diligent in their work. So that's that. Aristotle, one last thing I'll say about maids. Aristotle teaches, and this is for you girls, Aristotle teaches that the most important virtues for girls when they're growing up, there's two virtues that are most important for girls. He says temperance and diligence. Those are the two most important virtues for girls, temperance and diligence. So if you're a girl growing up, you should think about temperance and diligence. Temperance means you learn to live with self-control. You learn to live with self-control. That's the first virtue that a girl should develop, her ability to live a simple life, living with self-control, with simple tastes and things like that. And then secondly, diligence, meaning she's able to work hard. And it doesn't mean work like a, like a farmer. It means that she does her work diligently and takes care of her responsibilities. So to be responsible and to be self-controlled, those are the two most important virtues for a girl. The two most important virtues for a boy, so I'm not going to let you boys off the hook here. The two most important virtues for a boy, according to Aristotle, are temperance, just like girls. So living with self-control, learning to live simple, to have simple tastes. That's the first virtue. And the second virtue for a boy is courage. Courage is the second virtue that a boy should focus on. So temperance and courage. And the reason why courage is so important is because in order to be just, in order to be righteous, in order to be virtuous as an adult, you're going to have to resist a lot of pressure. You're going to have to resist other people. You're going to have to fight for justice, and that takes courage. So temperance and courage are the most important virtues for boys, and temperance and diligence are the most important virtues for girls. That's what Aristotle taught. He taught that in his book on rhetoric, in case you're wondering. So think about those things. Temperance is the most important virtue to cultivate as a kid growing up. You want to learn to live simply. And what do kids do? They do the opposite, right? They want to live on ice cream and birthday cake. They want to play all day. They want to have, fancy stuff. They want video games. They want to drive Ferraris and Lamborghinis. They want to live in mansions. They want to go on vacations. You see how the desires of children are the opposite of temperance. And so what happens is, if you have all of these desires and tastes for expensive things, when you go into adulthood, you've got a lot of pressure on you to try to figure out how to earn those things. And if you can't earn those things honestly, then you're tempted to steal to earn those things, or you're tempted to do sinful things to earn the money to do those things. And so not being temperate is dangerous when you become an adult. It's how people get into all kinds of crimes and sins as adults, because they're not temperate. So temperance keeps you safe. Temperance allows you to enter into adulthood without unnecessary pressure to make lots of money, because you don't need lots of money to live well as an adult. It also frees you to live and make an honest living. No matter how much money you make, you can pursue an honest living and be content with what you earn because you're temperate. And if you're going to get married, the most important quality in another person that you can find is that they're temperate, right? The most important quality that a man can find in a woman is that she's temperate. The most important virtue that a woman can find in a man is that he's temperate. That's the most important virtue for happy married life, is temperance. Okay, so we've got this fable of the old woman and her maids. We talked about all of the details of the fable. We talked about the danger of sloth and laziness, is that the life of a lazy person goes from bad to worse. Their life gets worse when they get older. If you choose to be lazy and fool around as a child, you're going to be unhappy when you're an adult, because you're going to have to do things that you don't want to do, because you're not going to have the freedom to make choices to do what you actually do want to do. If you're diligent when you're young, people talk about, what do you want to do when well, it doesn't matter what you want to do when you grow up if you're not diligent, because no one's going to give you the job that you want if you don't have skills. So ultimately, you're going to have to compete for those things. And in order to do what you want to do, you're going to have to be good at it. And so you've got to develop those skills and gain that knowledge. Whatever the requirements are to do those things, you're going to have to do and complete those requirements. And if you waste your childhood, you're going to start off slow and get behind everybody else your age and end up in trouble. And you're going to have to choose to do things that you don't want to do because you wasted time when you were a kid. So the moral of this lesson, things go from bad to worse for young people. How does this apply to your life? Well, the application is very, very simple for your life, especially because you're homeschool kids. Your parents, by homeschooling you, are basically saying, and I know you have some different situations. Some of you might live on a farm. You've got some farm work to do, things like that. That's all fine. Farm work's good for you because it teaches you how things work, teaches you to be responsible, usually develops your physical strength and health, so it's good for you. But your parents want you to study. They want you to learn important lessons. They want you to gain wisdom and skills for life, because they're thinking about your adult life and they're trying to put you in the best possible situation for your adult life. So when it's time for you to go to work and make decisions about your adult life, you've got all kinds of opportunities open to you. You can easily find work. You can go to school and college if you want to. You could become religious if you want to, and so on. You could join the military if you want to. All the doors are open. That's what your parents really want for you. They want all of the opportunities to be open for you when you become an adult. And for many kids, for most kids in America, the doors are not open because of the way they lived as kids. If they're weak and wimpy and sickly because they don't work and take care of their bodies, there's careers they just can't do because they're not healthy enough. They're not strong enough. If they don't get a good education when they're young, they can't go to college, even if they want to, or they can't afford it because they can't earn a scholarship or they can't qualify. And those doors are all closed when they start their adult lives. So your parents are trying to put you in a position where you can just focus on the most important things when you're a child. Study, do your good work, learn how to live responsibly, develop virtues, establish good religious beliefs and practices, so you're prepared for adult life and can have a happy life. That's ultimately what they want for you. And as a kid, you don't understand what it takes to be happy, and you make lots of foolish decisions. So that, I think, is the moral of our fable. That's how it applies to your life. It teaches you not to try to get out of work, not to complain about things you're supposed to do, not complain about the tasks that your parents give you, because if you do that, if you choose to kill the cock to try to get out of the work, your situation is going to get even worse, because your future boss is going to be a lot worse than your parents. The work that you have to do in the future, if you don't work when you're young, the work that you have to do is going to be a lot worse than the work that you were asked to do when you were a kid. And so if you're wise, you'll be diligent and work hard and embrace your work and love good work, knowing that it's going to give you opportunities in the future. that can actually allow you to live a happy life. All right, so that's the fable of the old woman and her maids. That's the only fable we're going to talk about today. So you've got this fable of the old woman and her maids with a very important moral lesson for your lives as kids growing up, studying, with parents telling you, please study and use your childhood years to develop virtue and prepare for your adult life. Because a lot of kids, if you pay attention to other kids, you'll see that they look like they were having fun when they were kids. They were at the park or at the playground. They were always fooling around, goofing around. They looked like they were happy and having fun. And then if you follow them and see what happens when they become adults, you find that their life runs into all kinds of trouble and they end up being very unhappy. So pay attention to other kids, especially older kids. Pay attention to the decisions they make and watch and see what happens to them when they get older. And you'll learn some important lessons. The kids who were diligent and worked hard when they were young, you'll see they go on and they've got all kinds of opportunities and things to do when they're adults. And the other kids who fooled around, they're still fooling around when they're 30 years old. And it doesn't look very cool when you're 30 years old and you're still living like a kid. And that's what happens to those kids. So the fable of the old woman and her maids. That's all we're going to talk about today. If you have no questions, you're free to go. If you've got any questions, anything you'd like to talk about, I'll stay on the chat for a little bit, but I hope that was helpful. The fable of the old woman and her maids. God bless.